My grandfather, Nono, Silvio Poffo, who came over on the boat to Ellis Island in 1920 from his home in Italy, Lucca, Tuscany. He says, Lanny, learn a trade, put it aside, and someday you may need it. Well, I learned how to work like Ricky Star, and I brought it out when I became the genius, and I had quite a run. That was the greatest moments of my life. Now in Charlotte, they ran 3 towns, and 3 towns a night, okay? And then for Greensboro, they'd all come, and they'd have a major, they'd only run Greensboro or something, like maybe 2 towns that night, the crummy town in Greensboro, or some of the big ones,
right,
where they bring everybody on. But for usual, it was 3 towns a night. And one of the towns would always sell out, no matter who his opponent was, and no matter who his tag team partner was, and no matter what else was on the card. One guy always sold out. So it couldn't have been an accident for a year and a half that I was there. Maybe you haven't heard of him, Ric Flair?
Huh.
Okay. Well, then we were getting, it doesn't matter who his opponent was. Now, I'm not saying that Wahoo McDaniel didn't draw his share of the money.
Right.
But then when they separated, Ric Flair drew anyway. And also Ricky Steamboat came in and drew mega money with Ric Flair. But Ric Flair was drawing anyway. In other words, but Ricky Steamboat brought it to new heights. But the man was over, okay? And he was over before I got there.
Right.
And I was just in awe of him. I just could not believe that this guy was this great. And he'd flop his hair around and this and that. He'd bring these $10 million robes into the dressing room and he'd act like he found them.
Huh.
You know, he's just a fun person. His dressing room was always a happy one. There was, on the other hand, there was the Andersons. They would come into the dressing room already with the excuses. And by say they, when I say they, I mean Ole. Gene wouldn't say anything. Gene was nondescript.
Right.
Gene just shook his head and smoked cigarettes and didn't say much except, hey, thank you very much. Dynamite Jack Evans did an imitation of Gene, the late Gene Anderson, God keep his soul. And Gene Anderson is an opera singer. Neely Pagliacci.
I was actually going to ask you about Ole later on in the interview because he had some not so nice things to say about you and your family.
Is that a fact?
Yeah, I'll bring
Such
it up.
a wonderful man. You would think that he was with the milk of human kindness by the quart in every vein. Well, what happened? Ole Anderson doesn't like me, and for very good reason.
You can tell the story now since we're on it.
Well, I'm on a roll, baby.
Okay.
And a man my age, don't stop him when he's on a roll. He would always be with the excuses. Well, we're not going to draw because. And he would have a new one every time he came in. And he was very creative. It's not going to be too good tonight because. And the time that got me is when Jimmy Carter won the presidential election. Evidently, it was a Tuesday in November.
Huh.
And he says, we're not going to draw because, presidential election. Well, that's all well and good. That sounds like a pretty good excuse. But then I go to the Charlotte YMCA and see some of the other boys that were in the other towns. How did you guys do? Sold out, Ric Flair. And I thought, so on Wednesday, he said, well, we're not going to do very well because blah, blah, blah. So I said, well, last night you didn't draw because of the presidential elections. But Ric Flair, they must not have voted very much in his precinct. Because everybody came to the matches.
Right.
Well, the truth was, and plus, his dressing room was like a negative pallor. And these guys, may I speak to you about philosophy of wrestling? Because everybody thinks they're a reincarnated Lou Thez. Everybody, all these old timers, they say, and even the new timers, some of them, they go, it's about wrestling. Remember, it says wrestling on the marquee. Remember, wrestling on the marquee. What does this say?
All right, video.
Okay, no wrestling on the marquee. How do you guys stay in business without wrestling on the marquee? Well, wrestling on the marquee doesn't mean anything. May I say that? And let me prove it. In high school, in college, and at the Olympic level, they have wrestling on the marquee, and it's real. And guess what else it is? real boring and real lousy tickets sold. And what's the most important? Why is Ric Flair Ric Flair? Because of the people. Now you can show it on TV. Does that mean they're going to buy tickets? No. Evidently, he caused some type of commotion. Now, Ole Anderson would knock Ric Flair and then kiss his ass to his face. He said that all Ric Flair does is try to entertain the people. And he said his proof of that was when he was introduced that 20% or 30% of the audience was actually applauding him and everybody else was booing. I mean, I'm sorry, the opposite. I'm a little older.
Right.
And I'm sleep deprived because I believe in 10 hours of sleep a night and 14 hours of relaxation. And I'm just not getting it right now because we're in Boston and I live in Florida. So he says because he has some of the audience cheering him means he's ineffective as a heel. And that's when he said, now the Andersons, when we wrestle, it's all boos. So I said, well, how do you get any reaction out of an empty chair anyway? Oh, was he angry at me? That didn't get over.
Right.
Okay? So, but I couldn't stand it anymore because I liked Ric Flair. I'm sorry. You know, maybe you don't. I do. You know, and there is some jealousy involved. And please, if I were the jealous type, I probably would have eaten a hole through my own liver by now because the Macho Man's my brother. And everybody that calls me up is trying to, you know, butter me up to get to him. You see what I mean?
Right.
I mean, I'm okay with it because I've done very well, you know, whatever. You know, I can handle it. And, I mean, he's not that way. He doesn't think about Jay Leno having a better job than him.
Right.
You know, in other words, I don't want to be an ungrateful person with 2 loaves of bread under each arm, you know, complaining that I'm starving to death. Because I had beautiful memories in the business, and that's a lot more than people of greater ability, got to have. But back to Ole, you know, he's very angry at me because, and then we started in on each other. He said, he gave me that whole lecture. It says wrestling on the marquee, and Ric Flair's just an entertainer. I said, I went outside, and it does say wrestling on the marquee, but it says tickets at the tickets. Tickets, tickets at the box office. And with the Andersons, all we have is excuses, but we have so many empty seats. And he said, we drew money in this territory, blah, 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 blah. He's talking about something that happened many, many years ago, and he's elevating himself and this is only because of this and that and this and that. And then he blamed whoever his opponent was, Bravo and Woods. Well, what happens is Ric Flair worked with Bravo and Woods sometime, and they still drew a sellout. Huh. And when I say a sellout, let me go back. There's all kinds of sellouts. There's SRO sellouts, standing room only means, and then there's other sellouts where the fireman says, no more. You've got no more tickets. You see what I mean? There's all different. When you hear about a sellout, there's all different types. A full house, that means you can still have a couple hundred more walk in.
Right.
You know. Anyway, so what happened, and this is why he really doesn't like me. 2 reasons. Once we started getting on each other, you know, it started getting a little bit heated. Okay? And Ole's a smart guy, and he's, you know, he can present himself very well. And this is no idiot. However, my validation was, where's the audience? And that's the running gag we had. And here's what happened. We're in Spartanburg in front of a record low. And we're in a battle royal. My brother's there, macho man, but he only weighed 190. And Bravo and Woods and a bunch of guys and the Andersons, and they've had enough of me. So Gene Anderson, who I had never had any trouble with, and he was helping George Scott with the book.
Right.
Ole says, we're going to teach you a lesson tonight. Oh. So Gene gets in the ring with me, and after we get everybody, and everybody's watching, and I don't know what's going on. A little slow for a genius. He locks up real stiff with me. He gets behind me. He picks me up, takes me down, throws me on my belly. And I knew what was going on then. So I got up to my hands and knees, And I sat out, switched him, got him in the head and arm lever in the deep waist, and pinned him. Now, I like Gene. That's why I didn't put the sugar on him, which is a submission hold. I just thought it was good enough to pin him and to keep him down for a ridiculous amount of time.
Right.
Okay?
So it wasn't the planned finish.
No, this was a battle royal.
Okay.
This is a battle royal.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
Obviously.
even a great battle royal is mostly scrambled eggs,
Right,
especially when there's so many people in the ring. So now Bravo and Woods are laughing their butts off and making fun of Gene, who's underneath me.
Right.
And you know, I've never had any trouble with Gene, but if you want to have a shoot with me, tell me first. You know. And then my brother's loving it, and then Randy says, "Ole, you got to try it. My brother's on a roll here. You know, come on. And I let Gene up, and Ole just puts his head down. Well, what I found out later was that Gene was the tougher of the two Andersons. And what they still don't know was, and I may as well let you know, my brother was the tougher of the two Poffos. You know, and how do I know that? By countless shoots. Now, my only chance to get even with my brother is I'll wait about 35 years, 40, and stand on his oxygen hose. Maybe then I'll get my revenge. But in the meantime, yes, he's better than me, you know, at that type of thing. So then our lives became like murder because they were what I'd call poor sportsmanship.
Right.
So then he gets on me about my dubious sexuality. He started calling me a fat this, that, this, and I just took it like a man. So I didn't, you know, I'm not a homosexual, but I'm not homophobic either.
Right.
And I'm not adverse to using effeminate gimmicks in order to draw money, because I was in business to make money. So I was thinking to myself, what would an intelligent man do? You know, when confronted with this fact that here's this big bully that won't wrestle me, acts like a tough guy, and he's going on and on about me being a fat or a politically correct homosexual or a, let's say, not the most masculine of his gender, even though he won't wrestle me. Well, I thought, what would an intelligent man do? And then I did the opposite. Okay, here's what I did. I noticed that even though he was a married with children type guy, that he had a girl in every port. Okay? Now, in those days, I was like 21, 22 years old. I didn't have a girl in every port. I was going through them like Scott towels. You see what I mean?
Right.
I was interested in meeting new people. And that's part of the fun of wrestling is, did you know that there are women of easy virtue? And they were willing to trade favors for getting their picture taken with you. And I always treated these groupies very well. I mean, I try to leave them happier than when I met them. You know, I mean, some of the guys would put them halcyon, or now it would be roofies, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Shave their heads, shave their eyebrows, defecate on them, you know, and I never got the idea of that. I was always very grateful for whatever attention I could get. So in the towns that Ole wasn't, one by one, I would accept the favors of his girls. And then it got around. Okay? So then Ole confronts me finally. And if he liked me at all before then, he didn't like me now.
Right.
I mean, it's bad enough that when being shot upon, here we are, a shoot interview, that, I mean, pardon me for defending myself against Gene Anderson, but if you saw pictures of Gene Anderson, I wasn't surprised when he died. He was a very unhealthy man. He had a bloated stomach. It was hard as a rock, but that's an indication of ill health. He also had puffy under his eyes, and he just didn't look well after any of his matches, and he smoked. So Ole finally confronts me, and Ole should have done this alone with him and I. And he says, "All right, Poffo, how do you like my used pussy?" And I said, "Well, after you get past the part that's used, it's not bad." Well, Turns out Ole has a big mouth and a small dick. And that's probably why he compensates by being aggressive and being a bully. But the thing is, when I offered him to, after the defeat of his synthetic brother Gene, I said, let's go. He wouldn't. He dropped his head. So, I mean, I'm saying, no, I'm not a homosexual. I don't always use my noodle, as my grandfather used to say. And perhaps my mouth was a little bit too big. Maybe I should have respected my elders. But I found being in the dressing room with Ole Anderson excruciatingly boring. And I also liked Ric Flair so much. And I was so respectful of him and so grateful that I still have the money that he drew. My end of it, which was much less. But don't forget, in my bucket, there is a bottom. There's no hole in my bucket. So whatever I make, even with an eyedropper, I still have today.
Right.
So, in other words, but that's another subject, because a lot of the boys live like there's no tomorrow. And for some of them, there wasn't a tomorrow. So maybe their philosophy worked well for them. But I believe, like Thomas Jefferson said, plan ahead like you're going to live 100 years, but live like there's no tomorrow. So in other words, either way, you're covered. But I was young, stupid, as it turned out. And I'm sure I could have done better to get along with Ole. But the thing is, I found it just nauseating in the dressing room with him.
Right.
And I couldn't believe that he would actually knock Ric Flair and then kiss his ass.
Right.
I mean, that's just intolerable.
I heard from a couple people that he didn't even want to put the title on Ric Flair at one point when he was booking.
See, I didn't know Ric Flair at that time. He didn't get the title till much later.
Right.
But what I had heard was that he didn't think he deserved the title, and he certainly did. He is championship material. I mean, the way he carried himself, the way he walked and talked, and how nice he was to people. He was a fun person. Have you ever met him?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's just he's a lot more fun than my dinner with Ole.
Now, from Charlotte area, you wound up. I guess your father started running an outlaw promotion a little bit after this.
Yeah, we'll get back to that in a minute.
Okay.
I think I missed my point. It says wrestling on the marquee. Actually, what it is, and Vince McMahon, that's why he's so brilliant. Entertainment. Because if it were wrestling, why is wrestling what it is? Because of you, the consumer. You made it what it is today, and stop complaining. Evidently, by your attendance, the buildings are packed, the Nielsen ratings and all that. Like in the Olympics, this has been an Olympic year. How much wrestling did you see? None. Because the Nielsen ratings are so smart, they're so finicky, they're so persnickety that they know exactly, they know when you've been sleeping, they know when you're awake, they know when you're turning in. And notice that women's gymnastics gets all the play. It's because of these are girls that it's illegal to go to bed with, and yet they're dressed scantily, and you can see everything. And, it's like they're just dressed for modesty and, and support. and I guess people like to watch women's gymnastics with just one hand. I can only assume that. But when it got to wrestling, they only glimpse it because they know that the ratings are dead. And the wrestling has an aficionado audience. I love wrestling, and I can't even watch it because it's a lot of huff puff.
Right.
The boys are tired, and I mean, it's great. I met Dan Gable. I flipped. My ex-wife was with me, and who was that? Well, that was the greatest wrestler that ever lived. She says, well, you can beat him. And I said, he could snap both my arms off and give me a procto. And I thank him,
right.
For only doing that. Because when he weighed 145 in 1972, he could beat his whole team except Chris Taylor. In other words, he could beat everybody heavier.
Right.
Well, Chris Taylor, I mean,
400 pounds.
Yeah, he was a walking water pit.
Right.
So that's not fair. That wasn't even wrestling. That was obese.
Right.
So anyway, what I was getting at was, if I get nothing across in the shoot interview, please hear this. It may say wrestling on the marquee, but it says tickets. And the most important ingredient in wrestling is the fans. No show, no dough. We've got to please them. I say we, I mean, no longer we. They have to please you. And you will vote by your attendance and your Nielsen ratings whether or not that person is worth it. Now, here's the thing about Ole that I didn't say. First of all, I respect him in several ways. He knew the value of a dollar. He was a very hardworking man. Him and Gene had an excellent team. You know, they had a rule in Charlotte that the heels had to hang around because in case there was a riot, we had to be there to help. Well, even though he didn't draw money, and I can validate that, he was very hardworking. He worked his ass off, him and Gene both. They organized the matches very well. They got a lot out of Woods and Bravo, and I'd say they were excellent workers. However, when you knock Ric Flair, you are on dangerously thin ice. And I'm going to have to say that, you know, you don't draw, you're jealous. And Ric Flair understood, and he was legitimate, and he was a wrestler, and he's an athlete, but everybody was black and white, and he was in living color. And he set fire to the ring. He was more fun. And Roddy Piper had that, and my brother had that. And me, I had it sometimes because my gimmick was so good, it made up for my work. In other words, a great gimmick. Let's say I want to make it in this business. How am I going to make more money? As a great worker or have an excellent gimmick?
Gimmick.
And if my work's good enough to just get by, it's my gimmick that's going to make me rich.
Right.
Okay? Now, but I had some problems. When I did the gimmick, the people loved it, and the boys were, and then finally and then I'll tell you something too. We need variety in the business. And I was like a one-joke worker. I worked that same joke, okay? I'm effeminate. I was only manly when your back was turned.
Right.
I was cowardly. I didn't like any, if I got a hangnail, I would complain to the referee, you know? And I imagine it got, you know, the joke got over, but it got old too. And maybe I didn't have that staying power than if I had been a great worker. But anyway, back to Ole. I apologize. I apologize that you are a miserable old man. Now, you got to get old, and I'm getting older too. And I hope I get it even much older. And if you ever see me drive, you'd be amazed how I live this long, you know, because I'm the person they invented the finger for, you know. And when I was in New York, I thought my name was your mother. So you've got to get old, but you don't have to get Ole.
Watch thousands of exclusive shoot interviews right now on TitleMatchNetwork.com.